Let's jump in. My name is Andreas Hildebrand. I'm working for ALC NetworX out of Munich. And for those who don't know, ALC NetworX is the company behind Ravenna, the open audio over IP technology, which of course is based on PTP, which somehow qualifies me to give this presentation. So, before we talk about why, before we can answer the question why we think PTP should be at the heart of your system, we need to look at the timing and synchronization requirements we typically see in broadcast applications and also in professional Pro AV applications, of course. First of all, we definitely want to be able to have a full media bit transparency in the system. So that means any signal, any bit of signal we are inserting in one end should come out unaltered on the other side of the system. So that means we definitely want to avoid the requirement for sample rate conversion. Of course, we can always use it if applicable, but we need to have it able to run without sample rate conversion. And that in turn means that all participating streams need to use the same media clock. Otherwise, I can't work without sample rate conversion. Also, if I have a network system, I definitely want to be able to run signals with different sample rates and even different material on the same network. So video, audio, high quality audio in certain areas of the network. So I don't want to force the whole network to run at the same sample rate, of course. Also, what I want to have is a determinable or deterministic end-to-end latency. And of course, that should also be as low as possible. And as an add-on, I want to be able to sample accurately align streams with each other. So if I have two microphones in my setup, they're generating their individual streams, I definitely want to be able to sample accurately align them wherever they are processed or received, right? So these are some of the important requirements. And of course, we all know in traditional installations, we have a house clock running around distributing the reference frequency, the house clock, word clock, whatever you call it. And we want to get rid of that as well as we have a network in place, right? We want to have the green cable still sitting there. Now, from all these requirements, there are three consequences. First of all, a traditional mechanism of clock reassembly upon receiving a stream is not applicable anymore because it's what we call the asynchronous mode, because we want to, process all of the signals in a synchronized manner. Also, because we want to have this time reference and time-based alignment, the distribution of just the master frequency, as we do with the house clock, is not sufficient anymore, because what we definitely need is time. Time in the network, and every system, every processing device needs to adhere to a common reference time. And as you can see, we have the asynchronous, the synchronous, and that's what we call the full synchronous case. So that, as an introduction here, just a quick look at various synchronization methods which have been developed over the years used by various industries, and the achievable accuracy. We have a serial scheme called IRIC. It's quite old, but has a good accuracy, but it's a serial communication. Everyone knows NTP. Computers are using that to synchronize into the milliseconds range. There's something like RBS or RBIS, which is quite often used on wireless transmission systems. And then there's also already PTP, the Precision Time Protocol, which was initially invented in 2002, had a republishing in 2008 and just in 2019. And that can achieve precisions down into the 20 nanoseconds range. And then there's, of course, the almighty satellite system, which is even one step further, because you can achieve synchronization down to 2 nanoseconds. Right, that just is an overview. Now let's look at the actual accuracy requirements we have from our broadcast systems. We identify audio applications as having the tightest requirements of all. It's even tighter than video. Might sound astonishing, but that's actually the case. In order to achieve sample accurate alignment between any two signals, we need to have a precision which is less than plus minus half a sample. And that is because if we have a transmitter which is running on a defined media clock, and here's the sample period, we might have a receiver 1 which has a slight shift off with the media clock. We might have another receiver which has a shift off into the other direction. And if we compare these samples at the time they are being processed or played out, we only have sample accurate alignment in the whole system if the deviation of any individual device is less than half a sample period. Well, if one device doesn't fit this requirement, then you don't have guaranteed sample accurate alignment anymore, right? So that's the plus minus half a sample, and in time expressed at 48 kilohertz, that means we have a reference system which is as precise as plus minus 10 microsecond or better. Otherwise, we can't match it, and 96 and 192 kilohertz have even more constrained requirements there. But then there's also the distribution of the house clock. Now, in these days, with AES11 requirements, a house clock is required to stay within plus minus 5% of its particular phase it's distributing, and that translates into even tighter numbers. So here's an illustration, you can briefly skip over that. So any device which is reproducing the reference clock is not allowed to have a deviation larger than plus minus 5%. And in numbers expressed, this comes down now to 1 microsecond at 48 kilohertz. So our reference time system, whatever we use, needs to be able to achieve a precision of less than 1 microsecond, basically, at the receiving device. Otherwise, we can't guarantee AES11 phase accuracy in the system, wherever we need it. We don't need it at every place. Maybe neither we need sample accuracy everywhere, but we want to achieve this as a general prerequisite, right? And that's why we have these numbers here. Okay, so if we look at that table again, we clearly identify that only PTP and the almighty satellite system qualify for these systems, because the other are either larger or use physical transport mechanisms which are not suitable for network applications. So we definitely need to use PTP or GPS, GNSS system. Well, we don't want every device to have a GPS receiver, right? So that's why we can use PTP. And of course, with PTP, the device which provides the common time reference can use a GNS or GPS, reference. There are other schemes out there, just for your curiosity, for more scientific operations which can achieve precisions even less than 1 nanoseconds. And we don't want to talk about these today, but scientific applications sometimes have requirements of down into the picoseconds range. Okay, PTP, that's why we choose PTP as the protocol. It's a widely available industry standard. It's nothing we for the broadcast industry have invented. It's in use since 2002 by a number of different industries. And these industries have developed so-called operational profiles, which describe what the message rates and how the protocol behaves and so on and so on. So on. Don't go into the details, because all this can be studied either by looking at the standard documents or other presentations I and other colleagues of mine have done on how PTP actually works. So I don't know, can you push the skip button here, because that skips over the part where PTP is explained. Just try to push on the skip PTP. Here we go. No, that's exactly not what I wanted. Just one back and skip over. I wasn't prepared that I can't hit that button, so sorry. You need to hit the arrow, actually, with the cursor. No, go back. Let me try it. Right here. Here we go. So, how do we utilize PTP? I mean, PTP is just a time distribution protocol. How do we utilize it now for our industry, for our purposes? That's the important question. So how does the synchronization and the generation media clock works? Well, the principle calls for that all nodes, all devices are running local clocks. And these clocks need to be precisely synchronized to a common reference clock or wall clock system via PTP. And once I have precise local clocks in my devices, I can generate whatever frequency I like. And the benefit is, if I tell one device to generate 48 kilohertz, locally, independently, out of the reference clock, the other device would exactly produce the same frequency and phase alignment. So they are independently produced, but I have the same clocks everywhere in the system. So that's just an illustration. We have a master device that may or may not be synchronized to GPS, depending on the application I need. And all the individual devices have the local clocks. They are synchronized through PTP, and then they can generate independently accurate media clocks on their own. And if, as I said, 48 kilohertz, 48 kilohertz, 48 kilohertz, they are precisely exactly the same 48 kilohertz, not just nominally, but physically. So once I have media clocks, As I just said, I can tell a device, well, I want you now to work in 44.1. I have time. Time is just the inverse of frequency. So yes, the requirement of being able to run different media clocks out of this common synchronization system is fulfilled. And even on a network, I can run different media clocks at the same time because they are independently generated. And the network is totally agnostic. It doesn't even know that's media on the network. Neither does it know that the network is running on 48 kilohertz, right? So you can run any sample rate media clock on the network. Of course, you can't feed a signal generated from a node which runs on 48 kilohertz into another node which has been told to run on 44.1 kilohertz without sample rate conversion. So you just need to make sure that those nodes which actually want to exchange signals are running nominally and in turn physically on the same media clock. Right. And phase accuracy, according to AES11, can also be matched with that scheme. It may need, in certain instances, the support of so-called PTP-aware network devices, which are switches, which can support transparent clock or boundary clock scheme. Don't want to go into these details, but these are network switches. You might have heard that supporting PTP. It's not a mandatory requirement in any and each system. It's only in larger systems or in areas where you want to have very precise synchronization, right? It's not a general prerequisite to have PTP-aware network equipment. Depends on the size and the requirements. And of course, synchronization across facility also works, well, not by distributing PTP across the wide area network connection, but just by simply having local GNSS master clocks connected to each individual place and then locally distributing the time by PTP, because the satellite system is distributing the same time everywhere in the world. I mean, even with the time jumps between here and the West Coast, there's no problem because the satellite system doesn't care about UTC. It's distributing time in international atomic time. So they don't even know about time zones with PTP. So that's the way it works across the whole world, basically. And then the trick is whenever I collect data from an input, I timestamp the current sample I'm just acquiring with a precise time I am at this very moment. So that sample receives its generation timestamp. That's the secret. Now, how does it, which the word for, I can't translate that. No, I can't hit OK. What's that? Oh, the remote needs to press some button because otherwise the screen went dark. I think that's it, yeah. I think that's already okay, just, yeah. So, going into a bit more of detail how this works in a system. So we have 3 types of clocks in our broadcast system. The wall clock, we mentioned that already, which distributes its time via PTP to the local clocks. So we have the local clocks, which generate the media clocks independently in one device. And then we have a stream running finally with the samples we collected from the device or across the network into the other device. And that stream has its own clock. It's called RTP clock, right? But you can see they all depend on each other and have a relationship. Otherwise it won't work, of course. So here's a picture illustrating this. We have the grandmaster distributing the wall clock time, the reference time. We have a sender and receiver, both with their local individual clocks, and they are generating media clocks. And by definition, as I just explained, that media clock exactly matches the media clock on the other side in phase and in frequency, right? So that we know from previous slides. Now, we have an RTP stream with input media sampled by the sender, and that uses an RTP stream clock inside the RTP protocol. Now, the trick is that the stream clock, by definition, is fixed or adhered to the media clock I'm using. So with linear audio data, the RTP stream clock, by definition, uses the very same frequency, time intervals, to timestamp the samples as the generated media clock. And that's the nice thing. One thing I should mention, but it's not that important, in order to understand the whole system, the underlying standard, which is RC3550, calls for the ability to have a random offset between the media clock and the stream clock for security reasons. Well, we are not so much concerned in our underlying principles with that, and that is why SMPTE at 2110, in contrast to AES67, put a constraint on this and said, okay, we are not worried about this offset which might be used in generating the RTP timestamps. Just put it to 0 and let every stream look like it's using the very same media clock, also in absolute numbers. So I can discuss this in more detail. Don't want to do this for now. Just remember, we have the local clock synchronized by the master clock. We have a media clock which is generated depending on configuration, but that matches exactly the clock of all the devices. And whenever I get samples in, they receive media clock timestamps. And since that clock is running on the very same values, it exactly knows when an incoming sample has been generated. It doesn't say you when it's to be played out, but it knows exactly everywhere in the system. Any individual sample can exactly linked to its specific generation point in time. That's the main principle behind. So now how does the, well, yeah, let's look at this one quickly. This is an RTP packet. RTP is the protocol to transport the data. It has a header section and it has the payload section. Here's the audio data in the payload section. Here's the trick in the RTP header. And the trick is the timestamp field. It's a 32-bit value which receives the media clock cycle counter of the transmitter device when it actually acquired that particular sample. Remember, the media clock starts running and it has a media clock counter, and that media clock counter at the time of sampling is the one which travels with the sample in that payload in the RTP header. So a receiver receiving the RTP packet knows, okay, here are a number of samples, and the first sample has been generated at that particular media clock value. And these media clock values are the same everywhere in the whole system at any given time, right? So the receiver exactly knows that has been generated at that particular media clock cycle. We have a rollover because we only have 32 bits each day, but we don't care about the rollover because it's just, you know, one day. No signal ever travels more than one day inside a system unless it travels back to Neptune and Earth 3 times, and then it reaches that limit. So we don't care about the again. Now the trick is, we want to have a fixed and determinable latency on playout in order to be able to align signals to each other. And that is done by introducing something we call link offset. Link offset has already been introduced in Ravenna and AES67 subsequently, and of course also in 2110. It got a different name in 2110, but it's basically essentially the same. What is the link offset? Here's a sender, you know, analog to digital converter, could be also a digital acquiring stage. It has a, you know, some buffer, the media clock generator, and then a network stack. The receiver looks pretty much the same, but just reverse order. It has a network stack over here, some processing, a receiver bucket, and then finally a playout stage. And now we have PTP timestamping, just that you have heard about it. Don't mix up PTP timestamping with the RTP timestamping. That's why I'm telling you PTP is timestamping at PTP packets just here for synchronization. Forget about it. We want to talk about the RTP reference. As I said, at the very moment a sample is acquired, that is my ingress reference time point. That is the moment when the sample receives the time or the media clock cycle counter, which is living here in the media clock. Right? And then it's packed in the stack, in the packet, it travels with the RTP, and then the receiver can extract this value and exactly knows when has this sample been generated. Right? So how does it know when to play out that sample? Well, that's where the link offset comes in. The link offset is a configurable value, and it basically tells the receiver, I want you to play out any particular sample, let's say 5 milliseconds after it has been generated, regardless where it's coming from and how long it traveled and what else. I want you exactly a 5 millisecond playout delay. So that's a configurable value, and usually an administrator does this, or a broadcast control system, or any, you know, management instance does tell a device, your link offset for this particular stream is exactly whatever it should be. Now, but the only thing the device needs to do is look at the RTP timestamp, which travels in the header of the RTP file, the generation information, add the configured link offset value to it, take a optional RTP offset, I briefly mentioned that, it's 0 for 2110 purposes, and then the math is very simple, that is the desired playout time. It says playout time, actually we stay in the media clock cycle domain. We are not converting back to time. once we are in a media clock cycle count domain, because the media clock cycle counts are the same everywhere in the system. And we just add basically the desired latency in values of media clock cycles to the math, and then the receiver knows, okay, I have seen this sample coming in, but I haven't reached that media clock cycle count, and so he has to wait. He has to put it into a buffer, and then once that media cycle clock count is reached on the receiver side, it's forwarded to the playout stage. And every receiver does this, and so that's how I can actually align streams among each other, even if they have been generated anywhere in the network. 2 independent microphones. Even 2 independent speakers could play out any given sample at the exact same media clock time with that mechanism. All right, and then inter-stream alignment, I just mentioned that. Basically, here's another brief illustration on that. Am I still in time, or? Oh, perfect. Because that's going to be one of my last slides here. In a typical production workflow, we have video and we have audio, and of course the video takes a bit longer to reach the playout device through the network as the audio in this example. So that definitely means the speaker needs to hold up the sample and put it into a buffer and wait before the desired playout time is reached. Of course, the desired playout time needs to cope or to match what this chain would be able to have as an overall link offset. And basically then both devices can play out that sample at the very same time. That's the principal idea. And of course, it's a bit more complicated in the back because all of these devices have these kind of buffers because they need to be able to cope with network jitter and all these various things. And an overall management system needs to take the processing time of these devices as well as some, de-jitter buffer and so on into account. And so the devices need to report their internal processing delays and the any other delays which are happening on path needs into account, and then the broadcast controller can tell the individual buffer stages when they need to forward the available sample to the output stage. It's a bit more complex process, but basically it follows the very, very same principles as the easy case between one and the other device. So that's basically the way how the whole timing and synchronization system based on PTP works. And I skip these things in order to give Hartmut the chance to talk about the difficulties and the benefits of using PTP. And that's basically it from my side. So in summary, we use PTP because it offers the required precision as a reference time. It opens up to use any sort of media, working with media clock counter cycles or clock cycles and counters together with the RTP protocol, enabling all operate and sync and generate the desired link offset and playout delays anywhere in the network with any stream. Any questions?